All right, welcome back. This is the first session of the afternoon, first day of UGM 2021. This first talk is going to be from Vasiliadis from Globus, our new partner and sponsor for this year's UGM. He's going to talk about automating data management flows with IRODS and Globus. Thank you, Vas.
Thanks, Terrell. Thanks, everybody. Great to virtually see some of you, some familiar names. So as Terrell said, I'm Vasiliadis with the University of Chicago. I do want to, before I jump into this, I'm going to talk about Globus and IRODS and how they work together. But if you want to just take literally 10 seconds and either text UGM1 or UGM2 for no, depending on whether or not your institution or you are currently using Globus or not, just gives me an idea of sort of how to calibrate some of the discussion here. And if you don't want to text, bit.ly/Globus poll has the same question on there. Just click yes or no. So just for those not familiar with Globus, we're a nonprofit service that has been developed and operated by the University of Chicago for a little over 10 years now. Most of us doing this are professional software engineers. We've been in and around the research computing space, in some cases for multiple decades, familiar with sort of many of the problems that folks deal with. And just in a nutshell, before I dive into how Globus and IRODS work together, I just want to talk about some of the high-level functionality of Globus to level set. So at its core, we have a reliable managed file transfer service. So a researcher or any user can come along and request that files be moved from one storage system to another. Those storage systems can be any to any. It can be IRODS to some cloud system. It can be an on-prem GPFS or some other high-performance file system to something. It can even be your laptop. And the reliability aspect is very important because we have this fire and forget model. You send the data, you send the request, and the data gets sent directly between the two systems. And Globus sort of monitors from the outside and makes sure things complete. And if they don't complete correctly, it'll retry and back off and do all the kinds of things that you might expect, just so you don't have to worry about babysitting the file transfer. The other big piece of what we do is we allow folks to share data with very fine-grained access control. So sometimes people think of sharing as opening up everything to the public, which is a requirement for some research data. But oftentimes you really want to just share with a subset of people, your collaborators, your co-PIs at other institutions, what have you. And so the way you can do that is, instead of having them get temporary local accounts on your storage system, on your IRODS system, you can just get them to log into Globus. You can grant them access via Globus to whatever subset of the data that you want. Then they can just log into Globus and download or access it and do whatever they need to do with it. And increasingly, people are using some of these services as well as others in our platform to build their own data portals. So we have services for creating search indexes on Elasticsearch, for automating these data movements and data permission setting and sharing and so on. We continue to build these platform services, and the community is using them and embedding them, in some cases building on top of them, to create more sort of comprehensive, customized data portals, science gateways, data commons, and various things like that. So and everything that I'm going to show you here is through the browser, but we do have we have a command line interface. We have an API, as I mentioned, that you can talk to directly. And very importantly, you can access most of these services if you're in one of the 1,200 plus institutions whose identity providers we trust. You can access these services using your existing institutional identity. Otherwise, you can just create a Globus account. And I mentioned we connect to a lot of different systems. IRODS, as Terrell mentioned, is one of the more recent ones. That was a connector that was developed primarily by IRODS. We test and validate that. but we have a number of other systems that we support. You can see the list here. We continue to add to this list based on what our users are asking us for. So we just recently announced support for OneDrive because a lot of campuses are moving to that as well. So what does it actually look like when you deploy Globus in an IRODS environment to get it to work with IRODS? So you have your IRODS installation. Typically what's required is that you deploy one or more data transfer nodes, so servers that are going to act as the data transfer nodes. And on top of that, you deploy the Globus Connect software with the appropriate connector, in this case, the IRODS connector, and that makes that IRODS system visible through the Globus service. And then on the other side, if you're going to move data to some other system, there'll be any number of other endpoints that you may have access to, and Globus sits in the middle. And as I said before, we control the movement of data and the sharing and the permissions and so on, but the data, you can see this with a solid line, are actually flowing directly between the two systems themselves. And users can continue to access the IRODS collections directly via the IRODS command line tools or other mechanisms, and they can also access them through this mechanism called the Globus collection. So this is what they see on their browser or in their in the command line interface. They see this overlay thing that points to IRODS data somewhere behind the scenes, but it's managed via Globus. And with collections, you can move data between collections, you can share collections, and all those kinds of things. You can publish and so on. So I'll show you quickly what that looks like. So I'm going to drag a browser window over here. So let's make that a little bit bigger. Give me a second. Oops. So hopefully you can see that. Let me go to the login page. So when you log in, as I said, you can access the system through any number of identity providers that we trust. We currently have a little over 1,200. So if you scroll down this list, you'll see, literally 1,000 plus. I'm going to log in with my University of Chicago ID. So this is all standard OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect for those that are familiar with that. We don't do anything custom here. So we're redirecting out to UChicago in this case. I'm going to log in and I need to put my master password in there. So that will hopefully, okay, sometimes my password manager plays up. There we go. So I get authenticated at UChicago, and this is important for us because we don't want to be managing user credentials. So I've been authenticated at UChicago and I'm dropped into Globus. So now I can go and access my IRODS system. So I have an IRODS collection that I've created in Globus. And this is sitting on top of, or adjacent to, however you want to view it, the IRODS zone on a data transfer node. And so I'm looking at whatever the administrator of that system has given me access to. So I don't necessarily have to expose the entire zone or in any subset of it. I can say specifically only expose home directory. So I think all of these are actually within my home directory. Actually, yeah, there they are. So I've got Globus zone home/vas. So I'm looking at just my own files here. I can select and move some of that data. So let's say I wanted to move it to my campus cluster. So I've got an HPC cluster down the street here on campus that I want to run some analyses on. So I can say, okay, let's move the images folder. Let's transfer that over to that cluster. There's a bunch of options I can set, but here, just in the interest of time, I'll just kick off that transfer. And as I said before, now that Globus has this request, you'll see it up here on the right, transfer request submitted successfully. I can go off and do other things while that transfer completes. It may actually have completed already. I can check on the activity there. Yeah, so that was just, it's just a few hundred K small files. So, so I move data, go refresh this, and my images data is there. So that's a simple movement. If I wanted to share data, which is, I guess, I said the other big thing that we do a lot of, I can select what I want to share. And then I can go, and again, it's asking me to re-authenticate here to say that I have access to this specific collection. So I can add what's called a guest collection. So I could share with, let's say, everybody on this at this user group meeting. So I could create, UGM share. And what this is actually doing is creating an overlay, if you will, a virtual overlay in the Globus service that's making data accessible at that mount point, if you will, that point in the IRODS file system. So I have this new collection called UGM share, and I can decide who I want to share that with. So I can share it with a user, an individual user, a group of users, or I can make it completely public. And if you go to that share, if I go back here and now go to UGM share, I can just search for it. I'll see nothing there because I think that public directory is actually empty. So I have successfully shared an empty directory, which is great. But the point is, you now can make the data accessible to others without having to set them up with local accounts, with spaces in IRODS. And you can see they're sort of locked down here. They can't navigate up or out of this folder because that's all I've shared with them. So that was just a quick view into the basic integration and the file transfer and sharing. Let me switch over to slides again. And I'm not keeping my eye on the Slack. I guess I should be probably doing that, but just want to make sure everything is good. But I'm sure I'll be alerted to questions. So some of the common use cases that we see, in particular, most recently over the last couple of years, I'd say we're seeing a lot of data being generated by different types of instruments. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this scenario. So I've got a cryo EM microscope somewhere, or I've got a sequencer or whatever, and it's pumping, almost 24/7. It's running through samples and dumping literally terabytes of data a day. So I can use Globus to move that somewhere. I can put it in IRODS. I can analyze it on some other systems and then move it to IRODS. Whatever my workflow is, the point is I can do this fairly easily if we're talking about small numbers of experiments or iterations. But in many cases, these things are running in an automated fashion, and there really doesn't need to be or shouldn't be a human in the loop, because that just slows things down. And managing the data manually is really, really challenging. So you can automate some of this at a superficial level, I'd say, or at a simplistic level, by using the command line to script Globus commands to move and share data and so on. So all the things I did in the web, you can do through the command line. And maybe you have scheduled tasks, so you can use cron or something like that. We also have a thing called the Globus timer service, so you can create scheduled recurring transfers. But again, these all require effort, and you could even write a whole bunch of stuff on your own to do it through the Globus APIs, but that's not really a good use of anyone's time. So what we've done over the past couple of years is we've developed a new service called Globus Flows that allows you to essentially create arbitrarily complex data flow definitions and deploy them to the Globus Flows service. So this is sort of a declarative thing. You specify the various steps, the various states of the state machine, basically, which is what it is for those that care, and have that deployed to the Globus Flow service, and then anyone can come along and execute it. So they can run this flow repeatedly, giving it perhaps different parameters. So you might have a bunch of experiments coming through, and each one stores its data in a certain subdirectory. So you can have a flow that fires off every time and moves, directory 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on until the experiment's done. So these flows can get triggered. They can move data, create these shared, these guest collections. They can share data out. So anything you saw me do through the web and a few other things you can do, you can automate in these flows, and you can just let them run repeatedly. And This is a fairly new service, so we have a few things that these flows are capable of doing. So the way the flow does something is through something called an action provider. So it takes action on a resource. So one of the actions might be to initiate a transfer. Another one might be to notify a user of some event, might be to initiate a search and get back some data. Whatever the case may be, is we have these so-called action providers. It's sort of the interface to that resource or that service that allows the flow to initiate that action. And you can actually write your own. So we have an action provider toolkit, and some of these orange ones here are ones that have been written by others. Funkex is one in particular that's used to call out to run compute jobs. So that's obviously a very useful one. So this is, again, a fairly new service. I'm going to show you a quick demo of what this looks like, and I'm just keeping an eye on time, so I'm not sure if I'll get to the rest of it, but I want to show you what it's like to take some data, let's say, from an instrument. I'm just going to use a temporary storage system for that right now, but let's say that was on an instrument, just came off some device. You want to fire off a flow that moves it into IRODS, and then grants access to some set of users so they can look at that data. So maybe it's like that PI's lab now has their data available, and they can get to it through Globus. So let me switch over to another browser window, and I'm going to do this using a Jupyter notebook. So hopefully many of you are familiar with Jupyter notebooks. Basically, it's a interactive code execution environment. In this case, it's a Python notebook. So I'm going to show you this flow. So this is now a brief look into what it's like to work directly with the Globus APIs. So as I mentioned previously, all these services, transferring, sharing, etc., search or flows, have well-defined REST APIs with all the things you'd expect, JSON-defined documents for requests and responses, etc. So what I'm doing here is I'm just defining some variables. So I'm just going to step through this notebook fairly quickly, point out some of the key things. All of this is actually available on our GitHub repo, so you can actually go and play around with this on your own. The one thing I'll point out is here I have defined my IRODS endpoint. So this is the same endpoint that I was transferring to previously. Oops, let me switch back to that. So this was the endpoint here. Somewhere is the ID, which I don't have it. Let me just go back to the notebook. Automation. Okay, so I'm just gonna run that step. I'm gonna authenticate. So all the calls to the REST API are authenticated. So I'm getting tokens back. Again, it's all using OAuth 2. So if you've done an OAuth 2 flow to get tokens, access tokens, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you're better off for it. So here is where I'm actually defining a flow. I'm showing you sort of the guts of the thing. This is what it looks like. Again, it's a state machine. So we define these actions. So here's the first action: transfer from this tutorial endpoint to a guest collection on IRODS, and then grant read permissions on the data to some groups. So I've got a tutorial users group that I'm going to give access to on the data. So I'm going to create that definition, and I'm going to deploy it. So I'm going to tell Globus, here is a flow for you to execute. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm actually going to run it. So I'm going to go and set inputs for the flow. So I'm going to create this destination path called Vas IRODS UGM demo. So I'm going to move data from, I've got some data, again, pretend it's a staging area for an instrument. I'm going to move it into this directory on IRODS, in my home directory in this case, where I can share data from. And then I'm going to allow the tutorials group here to access it. So I'll save the inputs. I'm going to authorize Globus to run this flow. So it's asking me to re-authenticate. So I'm going to go and say, yep, you would like to run this flow. So yes, it's a nice flow for the IRODS user group meeting. So again, this is all OAuth 2 stuff. That's authorized, and now I'm going to run it. So I hit the run button, and you'll see here it gets submitted, and you'll start seeing some status going on here as the flow is running. So again, what it's doing here is it's calling out to the Globus service, initiating a transfer, waiting for that transfer to complete. The minute the transfer is complete, it's going and setting permissions on that destination collection, which happens to be one of these guest collections that's sitting on an IRODS system, and granting permission. So it succeeded. I can look at the log, which is not really interesting. And so now I have some files that are available on this guest collection, and I can go look at them. So I click, and it drops me back into the Globus web app. And now you'll see I'm actually looking at this guest collection, and here are the 3 files that I moved from the instrument. Again, it's just to illustrate the point, and not very substantial data, but this could be, and typically is, very substantial data. And so when you're doing this at scale and you're running literally thousands of samples a day or what have you on some of these instruments, this is a pretty time-consuming task. But these flows really make it incredibly easy. And when you've got a nice, robust storage system like IRODS behind that, it makes for a really good user experience. And by the way, I'll just show you in the actual web application. You can go look at these flows. So I think this is the one I just ran. Yep. So this is the run I just did. I can go look at it and run it again. Again, there's consenting, good old OAuth doing its thing. And you can define these flows and let others run them for you. So you can set roles as far as who can run this. As you can see here is all my different identities that I use in Globus to do things. Like all of those can run it, but I haven't shared it with anybody. So it's kind of a nice thing where someone can set up this flow once, and then any researcher that comes along can just have it triggered, when data comes off the instrument, or when a compute job ends, or whatever the case may be. So I think I'm gonna pause it there. I was gonna show you a little bit more on the search, but we don't have time. I've got some resources here that you can look at in the slides that are posted. In particular, our docs site here, docs.globus, and then I also mentioned our GitHub repo. So github.com/globus has both these notebooks as well as a whole bunch of other sample code and so on. So I think I will stop there and take questions. And
very good. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you. I hope that was a good experience in front of this new audience. We do have a couple questions.
Okay.
One is about checksums, and I know Justin's going to talk about that next.
Okay.
Yes. The catalog, these are not coming out of the IRODS catalog. These are all calculated live, I believe.
Yeah, so there's actually 2 ways you can handle that. One is you can just let Globus do them on the fly. So you do source, test, and compare, or you can actually pass it a set of checksums to use as the source. So you can actually pull them out of the catalog if you have them and pass them to the transfer. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then in terms of authentication, I don't think we showed it. It looks like the chat has gone on here, but you did not show the authentication between the IRODS account and then the Globus side of things.
Yeah, so that's so that's called mapping. So what I showed you initially here, this is the guest collection. So this doesn't require authentication in the sense that it's authenticated by virtue of the underlying local user. This was a guest collection that I created, if you recall. But this one, which is the actual mapped collection, this mapping between my Globus identity and this VAS user in my IRODS zone is done through a mapping. There's a default mapping, so where we basically strip the name from the identity. So right. VAS at UChicago becomes VAS, and if there's a local account by the same name, it's automatically done. If there isn't a local account, you can specify your own mapping. And so I could, define arbitrarily complex regex to do all that and map to whatever local account.
Sure. Yeah, there must be a layer there somewhere, but didn't see it. There's also a document that's been pasted in the chat here for how to see that.
Yes, thank you.
Let's see. I think that's all the questions that we have. There's a couple of people typing, so we'll wait a second. Yeah, this is the first I've seen of the bidirectional in a demo. That's good. I appreciate it. Ingrid is asking, is it possible to do that mapping by looking at an LDAP? I assume she means
Yes.
kind of in a live.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you would do is, so assuming you've got your PAM module pointing at some LDAP, Globus is going to use that PAM module to go and do that user lookup, just like Linux would do a local user lookup. So yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
Okay. And we do have one question from Claude in South Africa again. Claude, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. You spoke about the document in the chat. I don't see it in this chat. Could you make that available? Because I think Vas knows the guys from Sandrin. They're actually using Globus moment, and we had a quick stab at getting it integrated with IRODS. I think for the most part, we made some headway, but I think the biggest issue is mapping Globus users to IRODS users. So it didn't look like we found too much information on the website about it. I know this was a recent release, Globus speaking to IRODS. So I don't know if we have a bit more information about that, something we'd like to test.
So Claude, thank you for that. Yeah, and actually good to hear from a fellow South African. So we definitely want to follow up with you on that and work through it. So yeah, we've been working with Saki and Cassandra and others at Sandrin. So the best way to do that is, if you haven't already filed a support ticket, just send a note to support@globus.org, and then we'll pick it up, and I'll keep an eye out for that. I do keep an eye out for all these kind of new connector related questions in particular. So I'm sure we can sort that out.
That ticket has been logged.
Okay.
I know it's been out for a while now. I haven't touched base with Saki in some time.
Okay. I will follow up on that. If you haven't gotten resolution on that, I'll follow up. And Greg, who's answering some of the questions, is also plugged into that. So he and I will talk right after this.
Thank you, Claude. Thank you, Vas. I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.